we actually need to finish up the last thing on that slide. And we're on page 21. No, there's no Pear Deck today. The point that we need to leave off with from this is because of the printing press and because Luther's arguments were so popular and sold so many books and pamphlets and all kinds of other stuff, his message was getting out far more than the message of the Catholic Church. He's winning what was called the War of Words. And as he was winning the War of Words, more and more people started to agree with Martin Luther. This was true among what we would call commoners, right, or peasants, but here not just peasants. Right, by this time period, a lot more people are living in towns. They have more freedom than peasants, but they are still considered the common people. Right? They're not noble. And that's our next category. And he was especially persuasive among other Germans. Martin Luther is writing in Germany. He is doing something that has been pretty uncommon. At this point, he's writing a lot of things in German so that the common people who are able to read it all can read his arguments. They don't have to read Latin. They can just read the language they speak and write in every day. And lots of powerful German nobles, princes within the Holy Roman Empire primarily, start to take his side. They start to protect him. Okay. When he's in trouble, they dress him up as a knight and they send him off to live in a castle where nobody can find him. He's not happy about it, but he is safe. But the biggest early convert to Luther's Protestant Reformation was not a German commoner or a German noble. Wasn't even in Germany at all. The biggest early convert to the Protestant cause was Henry VIII. All right, now this would have been your Pear Deck question, but it works just as well as a rhetorical question. Why did Henry switch from the Catholic to the Protestant side? In a lot of ways, it seems like he should not have been the kind of guy to switch sides. He had, before switching, publicly stated that he thought Luther was wrong. And as you're going to find out when we get into the exit slip today, Henry VIII is the kind of guy who should have known Luther's arguments and had a good understanding of theology to know whether he agreed or disagreed. Because Henry VIII, you're going to learn that he was the King of England, had, before becoming king, studied to be clergy. That was what he thought he was going to do. And so he knows theology. He knows the church's doctrine. He knows its teachings. He can understand what Luther's saying, and he disagrees with it. And he disagrees pointedly with the idea that you can be saved solely by faith. So he knocks out one of Luther's key arguments. But by 17 years after Martin Luther has got his message out, Henry VIII denied the authority of the Catholic Church in England. Remember, Pope claims that the church has authority over all Christian lands. England is a Christian land, therefore the Pope claims to have authority in England. But Henry VIII is saying the church no longer has any authority over England's Christians. And more than that, he has created a new church. He calls it the Church of England. It still exists. We also call it the Anglican Church. And he has put himself as the leader of that Church of England. Now, the reason for this ultimately comes down to things we might not see as all that religious. Henry VIII wanted a divorce. I guess at some point in some class you've learned a little bit about Henry VIII and his many wives. Wanting a divorce was something that the Pope would no longer grant. And the Pope had good reasons to do this. Church doctrine was opposed to divorce. But Henry VIII, really, lots of people know that the Pope can get you out of a marriage that you no longer want to be in. You can make up reasons. You could say, oh, turns out my wife and I are cousins, and we are closer cousins than we thought when we got married. The Pope would call that consanguinity, meaning shared blood, and boom, you could get out of your marriage. And lots of people did that. But the Pope would not do this, would not give Henry VIII an excuse to get out of another marriage. So England makes the switch. But this is not some kind of done deal. There are still lots of Catholics in England. And north of England, in Scotland, there are more Catholics still. So Catholics and the new Protestants in England are in a power struggle. Both want to control the British Isles. That's this part primarily and that part. So England, Wales, Scotland, and then Ireland over here. And then there are lots of other little islands that are also lumped in there. One of Henry's daughters, with one of his wives, in this case Anne Boleyn, and I know if this sounds confusing, which wife, which daughter, that's okay. We're going to focus on what you need here in the notes, but to kind of give you some opportunity to learn about the messy situation that was Henry VIII's life, we've got an Edpuzzle as our exit slip. So what you need to focus on here is that one of his daughters, with one of his wives, became queen, and that daughter was named Elizabeth. She is Elizabeth I, and she is a Protestant. And she is represented in that painting. Elizabeth did not take over as queen immediately after the death of her father, Henry VIII. Before her, her half-sister, Mary I, had been the Queen of England. But she died. And she was a Catholic. She was not liked by English Protestants. They referred to her as Bloody Mary. And she was a very vocal supporter of the Catholic Church and opponent of Protestantism. But she had also, of course, to be half-sister of Mary I, you might have guessed, she is the daughter of Henry VIII and one of the Henry VIII's other wives, Catherine of Aragon. Elizabeth will have a long reign, especially for this time period. Remember, people still don't live that long. Even if you are royalty, there are lots of things that can kill you. And there were people who certainly wanted to kill her. But she still manages to rule for 45 years. As I said, there were people who wanted to get rid of Elizabeth, not maybe outright killing her, but at least throwing her out of power and replacing her with someone else. In 1588, the Spanish made a major attempt to do this. Now, remember, 1588 is before the 30 Years' War. 30 Years' War starts in 1618. So 30 years before this, we have some evidence that this conflict is going to break out in major violence. Spanish forces, you can tell, control other stuff around here at this time. Remember, lots of things are linked in. Different points, Spanish will be linked to the Holy Roman Empire through the Habsburg dynasty. It's all interconnected. Fortunately for you, you need to just keep this simple. Spain was a Catholic kingdom, and it was closely tied to the Holy Roman Empire. Again, that connection is made through the Habsburg dynasty, which was the ruling family for the Holy Roman Empire. We'll return here for motives. We're not always going to do this. We didn't do this breakdown specifically with Henry VIII, for example. Although you can probably guess that since he had opposed Luther and disagreed with them on the important point of salvation by faith, we might guess that Henry VIII's switch to Protestantism had more to do with his private or public motives of wanting a divorce than with religious differences. Hello, this is Brown. Hey. Oh, shoot. Yes, thank you. Bye. All right, publicly, Spain's motivation is to put Catholics back in charge in England. Now, that may sound like a kind of strange public motive, because that's not going to make Protestants in England very happy. But it is much more likely to make Catholics in other parts of Europe happy with Spain's actions. And Spain can also throw into the mix, and they did, that at the very least, this was about making sure that Catholics in England could have religious freedom. Now, as far as having religious freedom goes, that's something that you guys don't think very much of. You may go to a Protestant church. You may never have even thought of it as a Protestant church. You may have friends who are Catholic, and you guys may never talk about church or Christianity at all. Or you may have nothing to do with any church whatsoever, and all of those things are just fine in the United States. But in this time period, if you don't belong to the right religion, you might be taxed differently than everybody else as punishment. You might face other kinds of punishment. You might be killed, harassed, chased out of your country. Religious freedom was not something that people in this time period could take for granted. And as an example of this, even after the 30 Years' War, in the English Bill of Rights towards the end of the 1600s, there is a right to bear arms. If you're a Protestant. If Jackson's a Protestant living in England at this time, he can own guns. If Ricarion next door is a Catholic, Ricarion is legally not allowed to own guns. So, religious freedom, definitely not something that everybody enjoyed. Privately, again, private motives are things that aren't bad, but they're not the reason you want to lead with. Right? Preserving religious freedom sounds a lot better than we're doing this because we're tired of pirates stealing our gold. But they were. English pirates were really successful at stealing lots of gold that Spain was bringing back from South America and North America. They also wanted the English to stop supporting Dutch rebels in what's listed here as the United Provinces. That's today's Netherlands, the Dutch. And then, the thing that the Spanish would have wanted to keep secret is this is a grudge match. We want to get back at Elizabeth for taking the throne after Mary the First. I put a question mark after this because ulterior motives are very often difficult to find because they are the things that people try to keep secret. But there's good reason to think that they would have held this grudge and that getting rid of Elizabeth would have been very personal. Mary wasn't just another Catholic monarch for the Spanish to support. She had married into the Habsburg family that's tied up in all of the power things going on in Europe at this time. So this is personal. On the English side, publicly, well, let's look at this. Now, like I said, we're not going to do the Pear Deck thing here. But, and this is very much a Hollywood version, but try to listen for what Queen Elizabeth says the English are fighting. And what you see here are signal fires being lit to let everyone know that the Spanish fleet is coming to invade India. That is, of course, Queen Elizabeth. All right, and I know we're cutting out of that before we've got to what, for almost all of you, is certainly the most interesting part, the battle. But what did Elizabeth say she was fighting to protect? Well, she's also fighting for religious freedom. She says if the Spanish win, there will be no liberty. She's just fighting for the religious freedom of a different group, her group, English Protestants. And here, and we're going to see this happen at different times, it's going to be very difficult to disentangle private and ulterior motives. But she most certainly wants to stay in charge. She wants to continue to keep her place as queen. And she knows that the Spanish view her as illegitimate because of how she got to be on the throne, who her mother was. She's not even viewed as a legitimate child. I don't mean just as a legitimate ruler. She's not viewed as a legitimate child of Henry VIII. And this is because they did not recognize the divorce that allowed Henry to marry Elizabeth I's mother, Anne Boleyn. Okay, and we are going to stop there. What I want you to do in our last roughly 10 minutes of class is continue working on the Ed puzzle from Friday. As I told you guys, I'd give you some more time to work on that in class. The Ed puzzle itself is just over 12 minutes. This should make sure that everybody has had time to run through the video at least once. So please borrow headphones if you need to borrow headphones. You may use your own earbuds or headphones. I'll put those notes back up. But just so that everybody is sure where to go, the thing you are looking for is, oops, not the recording. Hold on. If we can get the internet to work. is the for December exit slip. Okay, which is a bookmark that will take you back to Friday's exit slip about the Protestant Reformation. So please continue working on that until the end of the hour. That's our only exit slip. And there are those notes if you still need them.